Hi, guys. And next up is Deputy Commissioner Beth Card to talk about Executive Order 562, I want to say.
Great, thanks, Paul. And good morning. I think it's still morning. Feels like a long day already. Nice to see all of you. So first, I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce myself to the advisory committee. I don't think that I've met many of you in my travels here at DEP. But earlier this year, I was appointed to Deputy Commissioner for Policy and Planning, but prior to that, I've spent about 4 years here at DEP running the water program. So it's nice to make my way into the other Bureau activities and learn more about what all of you do. So it's nice to meet you. What I wanted to do was give just a short update on the Governor's Executive Order 562, which folks may be familiar with, and primarily let folks know what MassDEP is doing to comply with that executive order, and really make sure that folks had a good understanding of where you might have the opportunity to weigh in on the process and where you would find all the information that you might need on this process. So a little bit of background, on March 31st, Governor Baker issued the executive order which directed each body under the Executive Office of the Commonwealth to review each regulation under its jurisdiction. So for MassDEP, that's about 90 to 100 regulations that we have that we are currently reviewing and will continue to work on. So in order to implement the governor's directive, we have been reviewing these regulations and developed some preliminary recommendations for how we might comply with the order. And let me tell you just a little bit about what the order is focused on, and then the process that we're using to make our way through this review. So the executive order, the goal really is to make sure that our regulations are more clear. And so that requires us to make recommendations about whether we would retain the regulations as they exist, to rescind them, or to simplify or amend them in some way. And the timeline for doing this is March 31st, 2016. So for those of you who have participated in DEP regulatory processes in the past, you know that's a tall order to do, to go through that many regulations by that time frame. But we're making great progress. The purpose is to eliminate unnecessary cost, complexity, redundancy, or inconsistencies, and to create a code that's efficient, coherent, and consistent with other programs. So, for example, consistent with state law or consistent with federal law, which a number of our programs need to be. In terms of our priorities here at MassDEP, our focus is making sure that the changes that we make don't weaken environmental protection, that we look at ways to make requirements more efficient for the regulated community, look at alternate models that we may have not considered before, but we have to do so in such a way that doesn't require increases in DEP staff, and also without transferring responsibilities to municipalities that are already carrying so much of the load. So we are not prioritizing statutory changes at this time. We're really just focused on our regulations. And in our review, we've been able so far to recommend 10 regulations to be rescinded, 18 regulations to be amended, and then identified 58 regulations that we would retain in current form, but there's a subset of those that we would like to take up and do further review after the March 2016 deadline. So that's sort of the universe as it exists, and I can give you a little bit in terms of example of the kinds of regulations that we're talking about reviewing, and then a little bit about our public process, and then take any questions from there. So in the category of looking at regulations for streamlining, there are some regulations that fall within our Bureau of Water Resources that focus on Chapter 91, public access to waterways, designated port areas, and facilities of public accommodation. There's some work there that we need to do to streamline our regulatory process that would make compliance more straightforward for the regulated community. We're looking at some consistency regulations, consistency with federal requirements. So for example, in the AIR program, we have a low emission vehicle regulation that by state law We have to be in compliance with the federal law, which means that we follow California law, if you follow all of that. So we have some changes that we need to make to the low and zero emission vehicle package. We are required to do that. We have a number of water regulations that we are required to do by state law. So for example, we are looking at our Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program. There was a water infrastructure bill last year passed by the legislature that requires us to make some changes there. We're looking at that. We're also looking at some standards for land application of sludge and septage, and some specific criteria in those regulations, and that's something that falls more in the line of a streamlining. Our regulations are currently, our standards are inconsistent with federal programs and many other states, and so we're taking a look at that. So it really runs the gamut, as you all know quite well. The scope of MassDEP's programs are very broad, from air and waste to hazardous waste, solid waste, and water. And so we've really tried to boil down what our top priorities will be for this particular executive order. In terms of process, and we want to make sure that we're getting feedback, that we're not just doing this here at DEP without input from folks that care about the work that we do or have interest in the work that we do. So we have had the opportunity to do a few things. One, we have convened an advisory committee. Commissioner Stuberg has met one time with the advisory committee and talked about some of our preliminary recommendations and gotten some initial feedback from that group. That group will be convened again later on in November. We've also had the opportunity to host 3 listening sessions across the Commonwealth. So we've had one here in Boston, one in Worcester, and one in Springfield. And I would say the turnout at those was quite good. We had about 30 or 40 people at each session where we walked through some of the recommendations and took public oral testimony and feedback on the regulations that we were proposing. And then we're posting summaries of those listening sessions on our website. That information is currently there now, along with some other information that I think would be useful to you. So one thing is that we have proposed narrative descriptions of each of the regulations that we're proposing that we would revise in this process, as well as the universe of regulations that we are proposing to rescind. The rescind regs, and as I mentioned, there are 10 of those, are really things that have either been superseded by other regulations, or they are grant programs that are essentially defunct because they haven't been funded for many, many years, so it's no purpose in having those regulations on the books. And so we're trying to clear the decks a little bit as we streamline our programs. But again, the narratives of all of these regulations, summaries of them, are currently up on MassDEP's website, and it's not hard to find. If you go to the homepage, right on our homepage, there's a link to EO562, and you can get summaries from all of the listening sessions that we've had and the summary of the regulations. The last thing I want to make sure folks are aware of is how you can submit comments if you're interested. Certainly, we'll take comments, and if there's anything anyone wants to share with me today, I'm happy to hear it, but there are also some more formal ways on top of the listening sessions. The Office of Administration and Finance is really spearheading this effort for the Commonwealth. On their website, they have an online portal where folks can go directly on and submit comments straight to them, and then they are distributing them to the appropriate agency within the Commonwealth. So that's one way. You can send an email to MassDEP, and this is on the website too, but it's to the dep.talks email link, and those comments come in, and we can see them that way, or you can send a hard copy letter. That's fine to do as well. And so we're looking to receive comments. We're trying to receive comments by the end of October. The listening sessions have been going on throughout the month. That's our goal, and so would encourage you, if you have ideas that you would like us to consider, to send those in. We'd be happy to receive them. So I think that is, in a nutshell, where we are with the executive order. I do not think that we currently have any regulations that we have recommended revising that involve the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup. So wanted to let you know that as well, but if you have suggestions, obviously we will take those back and either consider them for this round or consider them for future amendment if deemed appropriate. So I think, that's it in a nutshell in terms of the EO562. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have or any comments.
There were a set of, it was at one time called trailer revision, trailer package, and then it became the 2015 revisions, which was to tweak some of the major multi-year revisions that came out of the last set. So what happened to those? Because those little issues were still out there. There were little corrections that were going to improve things.
I'm going to let Paul answer that.
We still have them. And we do plan on moving ahead with those. I think, obviously, in response to the executive order, the department's overall priority is to do the reviews that are necessary and make the changes that are necessary kind of following that order. There are a lot of other things, kind of maintenance things, or as we've talked about, the trailer package, the tweaks, the kind of continuing quality improvement, or always improving the MCP, that didn't quite fit in with the executive order material, and we anticipate that will start certainly working on it. We have ideas, we have some language for some things, we have a process, but actually moving the regs ahead will follow kind of the big bolus of regulations that will be the primary focus for our bosses and our bosses' bosses through March of 2016.
So it didn't get included in this review, it got bumped a little bit.
I wouldn't put it that way, but Wayside Cleanup did a huge reg reform, as you know.
Yes.
That was really very consistent with the executive order before the executive order came out. So I think that's.
It's on the
I
list.
don't want to say we're sitting out this round, but we need some time for that reg reform to kind of work through, to implement. We're still learning lessons from that, and then when this works its way through, then we'll be able to move ahead with our tweaks and changes.
Yes, sir.
How about 310 CMR 10, the Wetlands Regulations?
Yes.
And as a former conservation chairman, I managed 28 public hearings one night. And of course, that was during a significant boom process. And so, but we could potentially see that happen in the future. So I was wondering if the Wetlands Regulations are on the list and in reference to privatizing it.
Okay, so I heard two questions there. So the Wetlands Regulations also were amongst the regulations that went through quite a bit of reform in the last round of regulatory reform. However, they are on the list again this time. The focus that we have before us is to continue work on the regulations that's been specific to there's been a group focused on land subject to coastal storm flowage, and been evaluating that in order to help prevent storm damage and offer opportunities for increased flood control that our regulations don't currently provide for in the wetlands program, looking at impacts of climate change and sea level rise. And so a stakeholder group has been in the works for the last year. We're trying to finalize the work that group has done and put a proposal forward in that package. There has not been discussion about privatization of the program as part of this particular effort, but certainly if that's a comment that you're making, I take that back and appreciate that. One thing that I should have said more clearly at the beginning is that this process of the public process associated with EO562 is really just the beginning. When we finalize the universe of regulations that we are going to make changes to, there will then, of course, commence a formal regulatory process where there will be additional public hearings and public comment periods. So if you didn't weigh in on EO562 but have an interest in any of the regulations that we're moving on, you will then, of course, have that opportunity to do that. But that's the answer to the question thus far on the wetlands regs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything on the beneficial use determinations, the BUD process, is that that's been a very tedious process over there?
Yeah.
It's under the solid waste, right?
Yeah, You know, I don't think there is anything on the BUD process under the solid waste program, but I'm going to double check that and make sure. Off the top of my head, I don't think so, but that's a good question and certainly one that we have heard about. So I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Is there information on the website about the advisory committee?
There is not information about the advisory committee on the website. That was a group of stakeholders that we typically pull together on big regulatory review processes. So I don't think we have anything on the website. They have just received a summary of the first working group that they had. And as I said, we'll be working to schedule again with them in November. All that's on the website now are the summary of the public listening sessions that we had and the summary of the regulations that are being proposed.
Could you put the names of the members of that on the website?
We can certainly share what.
They're secret.
Yeah, no, they're not secret. They're not secret. I can certainly share with this group the list of who's on that advisory committee, and we can discuss putting that up on the website as well. Thank you. It's not intended to be closely held. We just didn't post it on the website because they hadn't seen the summary of their own discussion. We didn't want to post it publicly until they had the chance to correct anything we may have. Again, not a secret, so certainly happy to share it with you who the members are. All right. Thank you very much for your time, and please feel free to submit additional comments, and I'll get back to folks who had the questions that I didn't know the answer to. So thank you.